True story, a voice called my name in the Appalachian Mountains. You ever been alone in the woods at night and heard something that made every hair on your body stand up? Not an animal sound. Not the wind. Something that knew your name? Yeah. Look, I'm talking about that moment when you realize you're not alone, and whatever's with you, it shouldn't know who you are. But it does. That's exactly what happened to Sarah Mitchell in October of 2019. And what she experienced in those Appalachian Mountains. It changed everything she thought she knew about reality. My name is Nick, and I spend way too much time thinking about true stories like this one. A voice that called someone's name in the Appalachian Mountains. If this video helps you understand what's really out there, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and leave a like. Because here's the thing. What I'm about to tell you isn't some campfire story. This is documented. This happened. And Sarah Mitchell, a 34-year-old biology teacher from Asheville, North Carolina, she's still trying to make sense of it today. Now you might be thinking, Nick, people hear weird things in the mountains all the time. Could have been hikers, could have been an echo. And look, I get it. I really do. But here's what most people don't realize about the Appalachian Mountains. They're old. I'm talking ancient. Some geologists say they're nearly 480 million years old, older than bones, older than most life as we know it. And the people who've lived in those mountains? They've been telling stories for generations about things in those woods that, well, they don't follow the rules we're used to. The Cherokee called them the Nunahai, spirit people who could lead you astray. The early settlers talked about not deer and things that mimicked human voices. Your grandmother probably told you, if you hear your name called in the woods, you don't answer. You don't look. You run. Sarah Mitchell knew these stories. Her grandmother had told her the same warnings growing up. But knowledge and experience? Those are two very different things. Let me set the scene for you. It's October 12, 2019. Sarah had been going through what she described as a spiritual crisis. She'd grown up Southern Baptist, but over the years she'd drifted. Stopped going to church. Stopped praying. She told herself she'd outgrown it, that it was just stories her parents used to control her, to make sense of a chaotic world. Sound familiar? A lot of us go through that phase where we think we've got it all figured out, where we decide that the supernatural stuff our grandparents warned us about is just superstition, old wives' tales. Sarah thought the same thing. So when her friend Emily canceled their weekend hiking trip in the Pisgah National Forest, Sarah decided to go anyway, alone. She needed the solitude, she said. Needed to clear her head, reconnect with nature, figure out what she wanted from life. She left her apartment in Asheville around 6 a.m., drove an hour and a half to the trailhead near the Blue Ridge Parkway. The plan was simple. A moderate 12-mile loop trail that would take her deep into the forest, away from the tourist spots, away from other hikers. The forecast was clear. She had plenty of water, food, a first aid kit, a compass, and a fully charged phone. She'd done this hike twice before with friends. She wasn't reckless. But here's what she didn't account for. Daylight saving time had just ended that week. It was going to get dark earlier than she expected. And in those mountains, when the sun goes down, it goes down fast. Sarah made good time for the first 6 hours. She stopped for lunch near a creek around noon, took some photos, journaled a bit. She wrote about feeling disconnected from everything, from her students, from her family, from any sense of purpose. I feel like I'm sleepwalking through life, she wrote. Like I'm waiting for something to wake me up. Be careful what you wish for. Around 4 p.m., she realized she'd taken a wrong turn somewhere. The trail markers had gotten sparse, and she'd been so lost in her thoughts that she hadn't been paying attention. She checked her phone, no signal. Not unusual for that part of the forest. She had her compass, though, and she knew the general direction back to the trailhead. No big deal. She'd just backtrack, find the main trail, maybe get back to her car a little later than planned. But as the sun started sinking behind the mountains, the temperature dropped. Fast. Now here's where it gets interesting. Sarah said the forest changed as the light faded. It wasn't gradual, It was like someone flipped a switch. One moment, the woods felt peaceful, quiet, normal. The next moment, she felt watched. You know that feeling, right? That primal instinct that tells you you're prey? She tried to shake it off, told herself it was just her imagination, just the isolation getting to her. But her body knew better. Her heart was pounding. Her hands were shaking. And then she heard it. At first, it was distant. So faint she thought maybe she'd imagined it. A voice. Her name. Sahara. Now, you might be thinking, okay, Nick, it was probably another hiker calling out, trying to find someone. But here's the thing that made Sarah's blood run cold. The voice sounded exactly like her grandmother. Her grandmother who had died 3 years earlier. Not similar. Not kind of like her. Exactly like her. That same slight southern drawl. That same pitch. That same way her grandmother used to call her in for dinner when she was a little girl, standing on the back porch of their farmhouse. Sarah, where are you, baby? Sarah stopped walking. Just froze right there on the trail, her breath coming in short gasps. She wanted to call back. Everything in her body was screaming at her to answer, to follow that voice. It sounded so warm, so familiar, so safe. But then she remembered what her grandmother herself had told her when she was maybe 7 or 8 years old. They'd been picking blackberries near the woods behind the farmhouse, and Sarah had asked if they could go deeper into the forest. Her grandmother had grabbed her arm, not hard, but firm enough to make little Sarah pay attention. "Listen to me, child," she'd said. "If you're ever in the woods and you hear someone calling your name, even if it sounds like someone you know, even if it sounds like me, you don't answer. You don't follow it. Those mountains are old and there are things in them that have learned to talk like us. But they're not us. You understand?" Sarah had nodded, not really understanding, thinking it was just another one of Grandma's strange superstitions. But standing there in the darkening forest, with her dead grandmother's voice calling her name, she understood perfectly. Sarah did the only thing that made sense. She ran. Not back toward the voice, but away from it, crashing through the underbrush, her backpack bouncing against her spine, branches whipping at her face and arms. And the voice followed her. But here's where it gets really disturbing. It wasn't just following. It was getting closer. And it was changing. "Sarah, honey, where are you going?" "Sarah, it's getting dark, come back." "Sarah, stop running." That last one, the way it shouted, Sarah said it didn't sound quite human anymore. Like something was wearing her grandmother's voice but was starting to slip, starting to show what it really was underneath. She kept running until her lungs burned, until her legs felt like they were going to give out. Finally, she stumbled into a small clearing and collapsed against a tree, trying to catch her breath, trying not to sob loud enough to give away her position. The voice had stopped. The forest was silent. Too silent. No insects. No birds. No wind. Just that oppressive, suffocating quiet that makes you feel like the whole world is holding its breath. Sarah stayed there for what felt like hours but was probably only about 20 minutes, every muscle tensed, every sense straining to hear any sound of approach. And then she heard something that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Footsteps. Heavy. Deliberate. Coming from multiple directions. But here's the thing, they didn't sound like footsteps on a forest floor. They sounded wrong. Like whatever was making them was trying to mimic the sound of walking but didn't quite understand how human feet worked. And then the voices started again. But this time it wasn't just her grandmother. "Sarah? Sarah, can you hear me?" Her father's voice. Her father who was very much alive, safe at home in Charlotte. "Sarber, where'd you go?" Her ex-boyfriend from college, using his old nickname for her. "Miss Mitchell? Are you out here?" One of her students. A junior named Tyler who sat in the third row of her Biology 2 class. They were all around her, calling out, searching for her, and every single voice was perfect. Not close, perfect. The exact tone, the exact inflection, the exact personality. And they were getting closer. Now here's what most people don't realize about these kinds of encounters. Your brain doesn't want to accept what's happening. It will do everything it can to rationalize, to explain it away, to create a narrative that makes sense within the rules of reality as you understand them. Sarah's brain was screaming at her that this had to be some kind of prank, some kind of elaborate setup, maybe a hidden camera show or something. Because the alternative, that something inhuman was using the voices of people she loved to hunt her, that was too much to accept. But her body knew better. That ancient part of your brain that's kept humans alive for hundreds of thousands of years, that still remembers when we were prey animals, when there were things in the dark that wanted to eat us. That part was telling her, run. So she did. Sarah burst from the clearing and ran blind through the forest, no longer caring about finding the trail, no longer caring about direction, just needing to get away from those voices, those footsteps, those things that sounded like the people she knew but weren't, could never be. Behind her, the voices were changing again, degrading like old recordings being played too fast and too slow at the same time. Sarah, where are you? Come back. And then, beneath those voices, she heard something else. Something that sounded like laughter but wasn't quite right. Like something was amused by her fear, entertained by the chase. She ran until she broke through a line of trees and suddenly, impossibly, found herself on a paved road. The Blue Ridge Parkway. She'd somehow managed to find her way to the main road, probably a mile or more from where she'd left her car. But it was a road, it was civilization, it was safety. Sarah collapsed onto the asphalt, sobbing with relief, her whole body shaking. The voices had stopped. She pulled out her phone, still no signal, and started walking down the road in what she hoped was the direction of her car. It was fully dark now, no moon, no stars visible through the thick cloud cover that had rolled in. She walked for maybe 20 minutes, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, when she heard a car engine approaching from behind. Headlights appeared around the curve. Sarah nearly cried with relief. She waved her arms, stepping to the side of the road, and the car, an older pickup truck, slowed to a stop beside her. The driver's window rolled down, and an elderly man with a thick white beard looked out at her. "You all right there, miss? You look like you've seen a ghost." Sarah opened her mouth to explain, but the words caught in her throat because she'd just noticed something. The man's eyes. They were wrong. Not obviously wrong, they were blue, normal looking, but something about them made her skin crawl. They didn't reflect the light quite right. They didn't move quite right. And when he smiled at her, his teeth were just a little too white, a little too perfect. "Why don't you get in?" he said, his voice warm and grandfatherly. "I'll give you a ride to wherever you need to go. It's not safe out here at night." Every instinct in Sarah's body was screaming at her not to get in that truck. "No," she heard herself say. "No, thank you. My car is just up the road. I'm fine." The man's smile didn't change, but something flickered in those wrong eyes. "You sure about that?" he asked. "Your car's not where you left it, Sarah." She hadn't told him her name. Sarah backed away from the truck, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst out of her chest. The man's smile finally faded. He looked at her for a long moment, and she could have sworn his face seemed to shift in the shadows, like something was moving underneath his skin. Then he rolled up the window and drove away, the truck's taillights disappearing around the curve. Sarah stood there in the darkness, alone again, shaking so hard her teeth were chattering. And then she did the only thing she could think to do. She prayed. Now, here's where some of you might be thinking, "Oh, Nick's going to get all preachy on us." But hold on, because what happened next is important. Sarah hadn't prayed in years. She'd convinced herself she didn't believe in any of it anymore. But standing there on that dark road, with things that could mimic human voices hunting her in the woods and wrong-eyed men offering her rides, all of her intellectual skepticism evaporated. She didn't pray because she was certain God was listening. She prayed because she had nowhere else to turn. "God," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I don't know if you're real. I don't know if you care. But if you are, if you do, I need help. Please, I'm scared. I don't know what these things are, but please, please protect me. Please get me out of here safely." She said the Lord's Prayer, stumbling over words she hadn't spoken since childhood. She prayed the 23rd Psalm, "Yeah, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death." And something shifted. It's hard to explain. Sarah said it wasn't dramatic, wasn't like lightning from the sky or angels appearing. It was more like the oppressive weight that had been pressing down on her since the sun set suddenly lifted. Like she could breathe again. The forest around her was still dark, still silent, but it didn't feel malevolent anymore. It felt neutral. Like whatever had been hunting her had backed off. She started walking again, faster now, more confident, her flashlight beam steady ahead of her. And 15 minutes later, she rounded a curve and saw her car. Right where she'd left it. Sarah got in her car, locked the doors, and drove straight home, breaking every speed limit on the way. She called the police from her apartment, told them a simplified version of the story, that she'd gotten lost in the woods, heard strange noises, got scared. They were polite but not particularly interested. People got spooked in the mountains all the time. She didn't tell them about the voices. Didn't tell them about the truck driver with the wrong eyes. Didn't tell them that something in those mountains knew her name, knew the voices of everyone she'd ever loved, and had used them to hunt her. Who would believe that? For the next few weeks, Sarah tried to convince herself she'd panicked, that her imagination had run wild in the dark, that there was some rational explanation for everything she'd experienced. But then she got a phone call from Emily, the friend who'd canceled the hiking trip. "Sarah, I need to tell you something," Emily said, her voice shaking. "I didn't cancel because I was sick. I had a dream the night before we were supposed to go. A nightmare. I dreamed we went hiking together and we heard voices in the woods calling our names. And when we followed them, we found, I don't even know how to describe it, but we didn't come back. In the dream, we never came back." Emily had never told Sarah about the dream before because she thought it sounded crazy. But when Sarah told her what had happened, Emily went silent for a long moment. "You prayed," Emily finally said. "It wasn't a question. How did you know?" "Because in my dream, that's what saved you. You prayed, and whatever was hunting you couldn't get to you anymore." Sarah started researching after that. She dove deep into Appalachian folklore, Native American legends, accounts from early settlers, modern reports from hikers and rangers. And here's what she found. She wasn't alone. There are dozens, maybe hundreds, of documented cases of people hearing voices calling their names in the Appalachian Mountains. Voices of loved ones, friends, even people they just met. In most cases, people who followed the voices were never seen again. The ones who survived all had something in common. They recognized something was wrong and they ran. And many of them, not all but many, said they prayed. Some called them mimics. Some called them skinwalkers, though that's technically a Navajo term from a different region. The Cherokee called them Nunahai or sometimes raven mockers. Malevolent spirits that could imitate human speech. But here's what really got Sarah's attention. In European folklore going back hundreds of years, there are similar creatures. The Scots called them the Glaistig. The Norse had the Hulder. The Germans told stories of the Naxurer. All over the world, across cultures that had no contact with each other, humans have told stories about things that can mimic human voices, things that call your name in wild places, things that hunt you by making you trust them. Why would this be such a universal human fear if there wasn't something to it? Now you might be thinking, Nick, come on. These are just campfire stories. Folklore. Ways that ancient people explained natural phenomena they didn't understand. And maybe you're right. But here's what I want you to consider. What if it's the other way around? What if these creatures are real, and folklore is how our ancestors tried to warn us about them? Look, I'm not going to stand here and tell you I know exactly what Sarah encountered in those mountains. I don't. Nobody does. But I'll tell you what Sarah believes now, after 2 years of research and soul-searching and eventually finding her way back to church. She believes there are things in this world, spiritual entities, demons, whatever you want to call them, that exist in wild places, ancient places, places where the boundary between the physical and spiritual world is thin. She believes these things are intelligent, malevolent, and patient. They've been around for thousands of years, watching humans, learning how we talk, how we act, how we think. And she believes they're hungry. Not for food, they don't have physical bodies to sustain. They're hungry for something else. Souls, life force, energy, whatever you want to call that essential thing that makes us human. Now here's where it gets really interesting, and this is what most people don't realize. In virtually every religious tradition, from Christianity to Judaism to Islam to Buddhism to indigenous spiritual practices, there's a concept of spiritual protection through faith, through prayer, through the invocation of divine power. And in virtually every tradition, these protections work against the same things. Demons, evil spirits, malevolent entities. What? If this is all just superstition, why does prayer seem to actually work against these entities? Sarah's theory, and look, this is just her theory, is that these creatures are fundamentally opposed to the divine. They exist in places and states where God's presence is not absent, but less immediately felt. Wild places, dark places, liminal spaces. And when you pray, when you invoke divine protection, you're essentially calling that presence into the space around you. And these entities can't stand it. They retreat. It's like turning on a light in a dark room. The darkness doesn't fight back. It just goes away because it can't exist in the presence of light. Now, I'm telling you Sarah's story for a reason. Because here's what I want you to understand. The world is not what you think it is. You've been taught, we've all been taught, that reality is purely physical, purely material. That consciousness is just brain chemistry. That supernatural experiences are hallucinations or delusions or lies. And I'm not saying that's never true. Sometimes people do hallucinate. Sometimes people do lie. Sometimes people convince themselves of things that aren't real. But sometimes people encounter something that doesn't fit into that neat materialist worldview. Something that challenges everything they thought they knew about reality. And when that happens, you have two choices. You can deny it. You can rationalize it away. You can convince yourself it didn't happen, or that there's some explanation you just haven't thought of yet. You can go back to your comfortable materialist worldview where there's nothing out there in the dark except animals and weather and human beings. Or you can accept that you don't have all the answers. That there are things in this world, old things, powerful things, that don't play by the rules you learned in science class. Sarah chose the second option. She's back in church now. Not because someone told her she had to be, not because she's afraid of going to hell, but because she knows, really knows, in a way that goes beyond intellectual belief, that there's a spiritual dimension to reality. That there are forces of good and evil actually fighting for human souls. That prayer isn't just talking to yourself. She keeps a Bible in her car now. She prays before hiking trips. And she never, ever goes into the woods alone anymore. But here's the thing that Sarah wants people to understand, and this is what she told me when I interviewed her for this video. This isn't just about hiking in the Appalachian Mountains. These entities, whatever they are, they're not confined to one location. The Appalachians are just one place where the veil is thin, where encounters happen more frequently. But they're everywhere. They're in the abandoned places, the dark places, the lonely places, the places where human civilization hasn't quite pushed out the wilderness. And increasingly, Sarah believes, they're finding ways to reach into places they've never been able to touch before. Think about it. Depression, anxiety, addiction, despair, all of these are at epidemic levels in modern society. And what do they all have in common? They all involve voices in your head telling you lies about yourself, about your worth, about your future. Voices that sound like you, that know your deepest fears and insecurities, that know exactly what to say to push you towards self-destruction. What if those voices aren't just chemical imbalances? What if they're whispers? What if the same entities that called Sarah's name in the Appalachian Mountains have figured out how to reach into the darkness of human minds and call us toward destruction? Now, I'm not saying medication doesn't help people. It absolutely does. I'm not saying mental illness isn't real. It absolutely is. But what if it's both? What if there's a physical component and a spiritual component, and we've been ignoring half the problem? So what do you do with this information? Sarah would tell you this. First, acknowledge that the spiritual realm is real. You don't have to become some kind of religious fanatic, but you need to accept that there's more to reality than what you can see and touch. Second, understand that you have authority over these entities through faith. They're powerful, yes, but they're not all powerful. They can be resisted. They can be driven back. Sarah recommends prayer, obviously. She recommends reading scripture, particularly passages about spiritual warfare like Ephesians 6 or Psalm 91. She recommends surrounding yourself with other believers, because these entities target isolated people. But more than anything, she recommends staying vigilant. Pay attention to the voices in your head. Question them. Ask yourself, is this true? Is this helpful? Is this drawing me closer to light or toward darkness? Because here's what most people don't realize. Spiritual warfare isn't always dramatic. It's not always demonic possession and exorcisms and priests fighting demons. Most of the time it's subtle. It's quiet. It's a voice in the back of your mind telling you that you're worthless, that there's no hope, that you might as well give up. It's a feeling of oppressive darkness that descends on you for no apparent reason. It's an impulse toward self-destruction that feels like it's coming from inside you but somehow doesn't feel quite like you. And if you're not careful, if you're not vigilant, if you don't have spiritual protection, those whispers can lead you places you never meant to go. Look, I know some of you watching this are skeptical, and that's fine. Skepticism is healthy. But I want you to ask yourself something. What if you're wrong? What if there really are malevolent spiritual entities out there, and you've been walking around with no protection, no awareness, no defense against them? What if the reason you feel empty, anxious, depressed, lost, what if that's not just brain chemistry? What if you're under spiritual attack and you don't even know it? Now, if I'm wrong, if this is all superstition and folklore and religious mumbo-jumbo, what have you lost by praying? By reading some scripture? By being open to the possibility that there's a divine source of protection available to you? Nothing. You've lost nothing. But if I'm right, if Sarah's right, if the thousands of people throughout history who've had similar encounters are right, then you have everything to gain. Protection. Peace. Purpose. A connection to something greater than yourself. The ability to stand in the darkness and not be afraid because you know you're not alone. Sarah Mitchell went into the Appalachian Mountains in October 2019 as a skeptic who turned her back on faith. She came out a believer. Not because someone convinced her with arguments or apologetic or philosophical proofs of God's existence, but because she encountered something evil, something ancient, something that knew her name and wanted to destroy her. And when she had nowhere else to turn, when she was out of options and out of hope, she prayed. And God answered. She's alive today because of that prayer. She has no doubt about it. The voices stopped. The oppression lifted. The entities retreated. And she made it home. Now, I'm not saying you need to have a terrifying supernatural encounter to believe in God. Please don't go out into the woods looking for demons just to prove a point. But I am saying this. The spiritual realm is real. These entities are real. And the protection that faith provides? That's real too. If you've been feeling like something's been following you, weighing you down, whispering lies in your ear, maybe it's time to consider that there's more going on than you realize. Maybe it's time to pray. Maybe it's time to ask for protection. Maybe it's time to stop walking through the darkness alone. Because here's the truth that Sarah learned in those mountains, the truth that changed her life. You are not alone. You have never been alone. There are forces of evil out there, yes. Things that want to destroy you, to lead you astray, to call your name in the darkness and lead you to destruction. But there are also forces of good. Divine protection. Angels. A God who loves you and wants to protect you. You just have to ask. Sarah Mitchell still lives in Asheville. She still teaches biology. She still goes hiking. But she never goes alone. And she never, ever ignores the warnings of her grandmother, the warnings that have been passed down through generations. If you hear your name called in the woods, you don't answer. You don't follow it. You pray. And you run toward the light. If this story resonated with you, if you've had experiences you can't explain, if you're feeling like maybe there's more to reality than you've been taught, leave a comment below. I read every single one. And if you're feeling that darkness pressing in on you, if you're hearing those whispers telling you that there's no hope, that you're worthless, that you should give up, I want you to do something for me right now. Pray. Even if you don't believe, even if you think it's pointless, just try it. Say, God, if you're real, if you're there, I need help. Protect me. Show me the way forward. Give me light in this darkness. See what happens. Because I promise you, you are not alone in that darkness. And the light is closer than you think. My name is Nick. Stay vigilant out there. And remember, not everything that knows your name should be answered.